A poor girl took a beggar home one stormy night, not knowing he was a secret millionaire CEO hiding from the world, and what he did next left everyone speechless. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The last rays of the setting sun filtered through the narrow alleys of Crystal Heights, a neighborhood that contrasted sharply with its elegant name. Its cramped buildings and peeling walls told stories of hardship rather than luxury. In one of those neglected apartments lived Isabella, a young woman who worked long days in a small local bakery. Her hands perpetually smelled of yeast and sugar, and her hair was often powdered with flour from dawn till dusk. Yet she held onto a gentle smile that rarely left her face, even in the midst of her daily struggles. At 23, Isabella was no stranger to responsibility. She juggled her meager earnings to keep up with rent, groceries, and the occasional bill that arrived with final warnings stamped in red ink. Each day began before sunrise. She would knead dough in the bakery's back room, her heart brimming with hope that things would one day improve. Yes, her life was difficult, but she believed in kindness above all else, often giving away small pastries to the elderly neighbors even though she herself could barely afford a decent meal. One cold evening, as Isabella finished her shift, she took the long walk back to her apartment. She chose the route not out of preference, but because it was marginally safer than the shorter one. Street lights flickered ominously, illuminating the cracked pavement. Wind whipped through the alley, carrying a biting chill. Isabella wrapped her thin jacket tighter around herself. As she neared the corner store where she typically bought day-old bread at a discounted price, her gaze fell upon a figure huddled near the entrance. At first glance, he looked like any other beggar in the neighborhood: disheveled hair, worn-out clothes, and a face marked by grime and exhaustion. But there was something about this man that made her stop. Perhaps it was the way he clutched a small, tattered notebook, or maybe it was how his gaze flickered with a certain dignity that belied his ragged appearance. Isabella hesitated. She only had enough coins for her bread, maybe a carton of milk if it was on sale. Another part of her, however, couldn't move forward without at least offering a moment of compassion. "Are you hungry?" she asked softly, mustering a smile. The man looked up, startled. He seemed about 35 or so, lines of fatigue crisscrossing his features. He paused before nodding, his voice too faint to form a proper reply. Wordlessly, Isabella handed him a small paper bag containing a leftover pastry from the bakery, one she usually saved to eat as her dinner. The man's eyes widened as though he was not used to such gestures. He offered a whispered, "Thank you," but then tried to slip into the shadows as if unworthy of the help. "Wait," Isabella said, lightly touching his arm. I don't have much, but if you need a place to stay tonight, I can offer you a couch. It's cold out here." In that moment, she questioned whether she was too naive for her own good. She barely had enough to survive, and she was inviting a stranger, an apparent beggar, into her home. Fear flickered in her mind. She had heard horror stories of robberies or worse, but something in the man's eyes spoke of desperation and weariness rather than malice. She decided to trust her intuition, the same instinct that told her kindness was always worth the risk. He introduced himself only as Daniel. His voice trembled as he spoke. He seemed uncomfortable, almost guilty about accepting her help, yet too exhausted to refuse. Isabella guided him up the creaking stairs to her apartment. A single overhead bulb buzzed softly, illuminating the stark emptiness of the place. Its old wallpaper was peeling at the corners, and the furniture consisted of a shabby couch, a tiny table, and a rickety chair. A small kitchenette with chipped countertops completed the picture. Despite the meager conditions, Isabella tried to keep everything neat and welcoming. "This is it," she said apologetically, setting her coat on the back of the chair. "I don't have much, but please make yourself at home." Daniel looked around, taking in the worn carpets and the single photo frame perched on the windowsill, a picture of Isabella and her late grandmother. He smiled faintly but said nothing. Isabella offered him a threadbare blanket, which he accepted with a nod. He curled up on the couch as if uncertain whether he deserved even this small comfort. "Thank you," he murmured. I'll repay you somehow." She nodded, feeling a surge of compassion for him. "I'll warm up some soup. It isn't fancy, but it'll help with the cold." While the soup simmered on the stovetop, Isabella threw occasional glances at Daniel. His eyes wandered around the apartment, and he carefully placed his notebook on the couch beside him, almost protectively. Catching her watchful gaze, he explained, "It's important to me. My notes. For the future." "The future?" she asked, curiosity piqued. "It's nothing," he quickly murmured, lowering his head. "Just some old ideas." She didn't pry further. With a polite smile, she ladled a modest portion of soup into a bowl. Handing it to Daniel, she noticed the trembling of his fingers around the bowl. He was obviously starving, having gone who knows how long without a warm meal. That night, while Daniel slept on the couch, Isabella stayed awake longer than usual, wrestling with conflicting emotions. She felt a strange mixture of gratitude and worry. Gratitude that she had a roof over her head, no matter how fragile her situation was. Worry because she had no idea how long she could sustain even her own needs, let alone another's. When morning broke, Isabella woke early to prepare for her bakery shift. The plan was to let Daniel rest a bit more. She wrote him a small note, explaining that if he wanted to stay another night, he was welcome, and that she'd leave the door unlocked for him during her morning shift. Not exactly the safest choice, but trusting him felt right. The bakery was bustling with the usual morning rush. Customers clamored for freshly baked bread and sweet pastries. The warmth of the ovens was comforting, and Isabella let the swirl of daily tasks fill her mind, temporarily pushing aside her personal uncertainties. By the time her shift ended at midday, she hurried home, half expecting Daniel might have disappeared. Instead, she found him standing in the kitchen, awkwardly washing the single mug and bowl he had used. At his feet lay a small bag with a few groceries, vegetables, a loaf of bread, and a carton of milk. "I didn't steal it," he said quickly, as if reading the surprise in her eyes. "I managed to do a small chore for the corner store's owner and, well, it was enough to get some basic food." Isabella felt her heart soften. Thank you," she managed, moved by the gesture. "I'm grateful for the shelter," Daniel replied. "It's the least I can do." Over the next few days, a rhythm emerged. Isabella would wake early for her bakery job, leaving Daniel to tidy up or look for odd jobs in the neighborhood. Sometimes he would find a way to earn a few coins, sometimes not. But each time she came home, there would be a bit more food in the small fridge, or the floor would be freshly swept or the windows wiped. Simple acts of gratitude. What Isabella didn't know, what no one in that struggling neighborhood could have guessed, was that Daniel's identity was far more complicated than a mere beggar. Each moment he spent quietly in her apartment, he would scribble notes in his battered notebook or make careful phone calls when she wasn't around, using a cheap cell phone he had kept hidden in his coat pocket. Yet, if you asked him outright, Daniel would never have admitted the truth. He wanted to see Isabella's sincerity, her genuine kindness, before he revealed anything that could change their entire relationship. One night, while the pair were sharing an inexpensive dinner of rice and vegetables, Daniel asked carefully, "You're always so generous. Don't you ever worry about running out? About me not paying you back?" Isabella lowered her gaze. "I do worry, but I can't turn away someone who needs help. I guess it's how my grandmother raised me. She always said that sharing kindness when you have little is worth more than sharing wealth when you have plenty." Her words touched Daniel more deeply than she could ever have known. He thought of the vast wealth and power he had kept hidden, ironically feeling more impoverished in spirit than ever before. In that dingy apartment, with a near-empty fridge, He found a sense of warmth and honesty that had eluded him in the polished corporate halls he once roamed. As the city slept, neither Isabella nor Daniel realized just how close they were to the turning point of their lives. The winds of change had started to swirl around them. In the dim light of a single overhead bulb, Daniel's eyes flickered with a determination he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, everything would begin to shift in ways Isabella could not possibly predict. Because when you extend your hand to a stranger, you never quite know whose hand you are truly holding, and sometimes that hand can guide you toward a destiny greater than any dream you've ever dared to imagine. Early the next morning, Isabella woke to the faint scent of coffee brewing, a small luxury she almost never allowed herself due to her tight budget. Startled, she rushed into the kitchenette, expecting to find an intruder, only to see Daniel carefully rinsing out her lone coffee mug and placing it on the rickety table with practiced gentleness. He glanced over his shoulder. "I hope you don't mind. I found a bit of coffee in the back of your cupboard. Figured we both could use a little pick-me-up before heading out." Isabella smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I didn't realize I still had any coffee left," she said, then added, "It's fine. Thank you." They shared a quiet moment, sipping from mismatched cups. Isabella's mind wandered to how drastically life could change. A few days ago, she had been coming home to a cold, empty apartment. Now, there was a surprising sense of companionship. Their conversation remained simple. The weather, a gentle question or two about each other's day. Yet Isabella felt an odd warmth in the air. "I need to head to the bakery soon," she said, glancing at the clock. "My boss gets irritated if I'm even a minute late." Daniel set down his coffee. "You go ahead. I'll see if I can find more small jobs around the neighborhood. Maybe some painting or loading work. People sometimes pay cash for that." She nodded, grateful. "Thank you. Just be safe, okay?" Daniel almost smiled. "I will." That same morning, about an hour into Isabella's shift, she encountered Mr. Green, an elderly regular who picked up a half-dozen pastries daily. He eyed her more carefully than usual and asked, "Child, are you all right? You look different these days. Happier, but also worried." Isabella shrugged, not sure how to respond. "I'm fine, Mr. Green. Just life keeps changing. It's hard to keep up sometimes." The old man nodded, the corners of his eyes creasing with kindness. "Ah, to be young and caught in life's storms. Don't forget to look after yourself." With that he left, but Isabella kept thinking about his words. Had she changed so noticeably? Around midday, her boss, a stern woman named Beatrice, approached while Isabella was sweeping the bakery floor. "We have a bigger order coming in for a local function. It's a chance for the bakery to get more recognition," Beatrice said in her usual no-nonsense tone. "I'll need you to stay late this week, help with the dough prep and packaging." Isabella hesitated. She needed the extra pay, but staying late meant returning home after dark, when the streets in her neighborhood were at their most dangerous. Still, she forced a smile. "Sure, Mrs. Beatrice, I'll do it." And so, for the next few days, Isabella worked extra hours. She'd often come home well after dark, exhausted. Each time, however, she found that Daniel had left a small meal waiting for her, a modest dish of steamed rice or a bowl of reheated soup. Nothing lavish, but far more than she had expected from someone with no resources of his own. "You shouldn't be cooking for me," she'd say. "I barely have enough groceries to last the week." Daniel's reply was always the same. "I find ways to stretch it, and I've earned a few coins here and there. Besides, you need the food more than I do after such long shifts." On one of those nights, she returned to find him studying his tattered notebook with intense focus, jotting down notes under the dim overhead lamp. Before she could ask what he was writing, he hurriedly closed it. A flicker of defensiveness crossed his face. "It's just personal," he explained softly, as if embarrassed. Isabella didn't push. She simply nodded and set down her purse. Deep inside, she was curious. Did he keep a diary? A journal? Or was it something more practical, like a blueprint for a future he rarely spoke about? Part of her wanted to know, but another part thought it wasn't her place to pry. After all, she was the one who'd welcomed a stranger into her home. She had no right to demand revelations. A few afternoons later, Isabella finished her extended shift and decided to spend some of her hard-earned tips on fresh vegetables from a nearby market stall. Money was always tight, but she felt Daniel's daily gestures deserved a small reward. She was in a particularly good mood, having had a pleasant conversation with Mr. Green that morning about following one's dreams. It felt like the kind of day where the sun shone a bit brighter despite the battered surroundings. She arrived home with a shopping bag full of carrots, onions, potatoes, and a small portion of ground meat. Excitement bloomed at the thought of making a hearty stew, a treat she hadn't enjoyed in a long time. However, as she climbed the last flight of stairs, she heard raised voices echoing through the hallway. The door to her apartment stood slightly ajar. Worried, Isabella rushed inside to find Daniel facing a hostile visitor. Her landlord, Mr. Carter, a heavy-set man in his 50s who was known for his temper and impatience about rent. "You have no right to host a drifter," Mr. Carter snarled, pointing accusingly at Daniel. "I specifically said you can't have other people living here, especially not without my permission, and especially not freeloaders." Daniel was standing firm but looked decidedly uncomfortable, as if uncertain how to respond without making matters worse. Isabella dropped her grocery bag on the table. "Mr. Carter, please, Daniel isn't freeloading, he's just helping me out." "Helping you out by mooching off your tiny apartment and probably driving up the water and electricity bills," Mr. Carter snapped. "Your rent is late again, and now you've got an unregistered guest. This is grounds for eviction." Heat flooded Isabella's cheeks. She knew she was a few days behind on rent. The extended hours at the bakery hadn't yet translated into a proper paycheck. "I'll pay, Mr. Carter, I promise. I just need a bit more time." He scowled, noticing her trembling hands. "You have until the end of this week. If you don't hand over the full amount, plus the penalty fee, you're both out on the street. And don't even think about sneaking around behind my back." Before Isabella could protest, Mr. Carter stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the thin walls. Silence settled like a fog. She felt tears brimming in her eyes, not only from the embarrassment, but also from the crushing reality that she was barely scraping by. And now, she might lose what little she had. "I'm sorry," Daniel said quietly, approaching her. "I didn't know he was so strict." Isabella shook her head. "It's not your fault. This was bound to happen. I was already behind on rent, and Mr. Carter never misses a chance to squeeze more money from his tenants." They picked up the groceries that had scattered across the floor when she dropped the bag. The carrots were bruised, one onion had rolled into the corner, and her mood, once joyful, now felt as battered as the vegetables. "Let me help you somehow," Daniel insisted gently. "I can find more stable work. I could contribute. But Isabella cut him off. "You're not the problem. I don't blame you. But I need to figure out how to pay Mr. Carter. I'll have to ask Mrs. Beatrice for an advance or maybe find a weekend job." She rubbed her temples, the tension pounding behind her eyes. "This place may be old and small, but it's all I have. I can't lose it." Daniel looked as though he wanted to say something more, but the weight of her worry seemed to dampen any immediate hope. He hesitated, as if struggling between honesty and caution, ultimately choosing not to reveal whatever flickered behind his gaze. That night, Isabella forced a thin smile and tried to cook the stew she had planned. The smell of onions sizzling in the pan mingled with the unspoken anxiety hanging in the air. Daniel insisted on helping chop vegetables. Despite the heaviness of the day's events, they worked side by side, cutting potatoes into neat cubes and stirring the simmering pot. When the stew was finally ready, they ate in silence. The comforting aroma and flavor did little to soothe Isabella's nerves. She replayed the landlord's ultimatum in her head. Time was ticking. At best, she had a handful of days to find a sum of money she didn't have. Daniel noticed her distress. "You're exhausted," he murmured after they finished the meal. "Maybe you should rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out a plan together." Exhaling shakily, she nodded. It was kind of him to say, "together," but she wondered how they could fix her financial crisis. He wasn't exactly flush with money either, and the small jobs he did in the neighborhood wouldn't cover anything close to her overdue rent. That night, while Daniel tidied up the dishes, Isabella lay awake on her narrow bed, battling tears of frustration. Usually she found solace in the quiet hum of her old fan or the faint glow of streetlights through the curtains. But now she could barely focus on anything except the looming threat of eviction. She couldn't bear the thought of going back to the streets, especially not with Daniel caught up in her troubles. In the other room, Daniel flipped through his notebook. Each page contained ideas, figures, phone numbers, remnants of a world he'd nearly abandoned. The guilt weighed heavily on him. He hadn't planned for Isabella to face real danger or lose her home. Now, it felt like she was on the brink of losing everything, yet she had shown him nothing but kindness. He clenched his jaw, deciding that come morning he would do more than passively seek odd jobs. He would take a risk, one that involved revealing pieces of himself he'd kept hidden. If he didn't act, Isabella would have nowhere else to turn. And Daniel couldn't stand by and watch the only genuine kindness he'd known in a long time get crushed beneath an eviction notice. His decision made, Daniel set the notebook aside and lowered himself onto the couch. He looked at the worn ceiling, letting the hush of the night envelop him. The hours ahead would be life-changing. For Isabella, for himself, and for a reality far bigger than the tiny apartment that had unexpectedly become his refuge. Morning arrived with a brittle chill in the air, as though the entire city had awakened under a gray cloud of worry. Isabella opened her eyes to find the apartment unusually quiet. For a moment she wondered if Daniel had already left. The tension from the previous night weighed on her. The memory of Mr. Carter's ultimatum flashed through her mind, and her heart sank, heavy with anxiety she couldn't quite shake off. She stepped into the living room, still in her rumpled t-shirt and sweatpants. The couch was empty, but Daniel's notebook lay on the small coffee table, a sign that he hadn't gone far. In the kitchenette, she found him at the sink, rinsing off a set of second-hand plates he'd purchased from a street market, intending to replace her chipped ones. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing calloused forearms. At first glance, you'd think those calluses came from a lifetime of odd jobs or manual labor, but they didn't quite match the rest of his refined gestures. "You're up early," Isabella said, forcing brightness into her tone. He turned, offering a gentle nod. "I wanted to catch the manager at a construction site down the road. I heard they might be hiring day laborers. It won't be much, but every little bit will help." She felt a pang of gratitude mingled with guilt. "Daniel, you don't have to push yourself so hard." He dried his hands, his eyes steady. "I want to, Isabella. It's not right that you should shoulder everything alone. And—" He paused, swallowing as if fighting back deeper words. "I owe you." Unsure how to respond, she simply nodded. This was the first time she'd seen him so resolute, a hint of something unspoken lingering in his expression, a spark of determination that went beyond the usual courtesy he'd shown. Soon after, Isabella hurried off to the bakery, the threat of eviction still ringing in her ears. Mrs. Beatrice, who prided herself on punctuality, was already waiting at the counter, arms folded. Isabella braced herself for a reprimand about being a few minutes late, but to her surprise, Beatrice said nothing about her tardiness. "You look pale," her boss observed instead. "I need you strong today. There's a wedding order that needs to be perfect. Are you ready to take on some extra tasks again?" Isabella summoned a brave smile, even if her heart felt 1,000 miles away. "Yes, I can handle it." The day wore on in a blur of flour and icing. Isabella shaped dough, filled pastries, and piped decorative swirls onto towering cakes. Every so often she glanced at the clock, worrying about Daniel's situation at the construction site and how little time she had left to meet Mr. Carter's demands. By late afternoon she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Yet, before her shift ended, she gathered the courage to approach Beatrice for an advance on her wages. "I know I asked once before," Isabella began in a hushed tone, "but I'm in a tough spot. I'm about to be evicted." Beatrice studied her with narrowed eyes. "The bakery's finances are tight, you know that. We're investing in equipment for these big orders." "Just a small advance," Isabella pleaded. "I'll work overtime to pay it off." Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Finally, her boss relented with a resigned sigh. "Fine, but it won't be much, and I'll deduct it from your next paycheck. Understand?" Relief swept through Isabella. "Thank you, Mrs. Beatrice. I promise I'll make it right." She left the bakery that evening with a modest envelope of cash, enough to cover a portion of her back rent, but still not the entire amount Mr. Carter demanded. Not to mention the late fees and other charges he'd likely tack on just for spite. She trudged home, turning over her remaining options in her mind. Could she sell a few possessions? She had so little to begin with. Or maybe there was a local charity she could approach, though her pride stung at the thought. When she got to her apartment, she found Daniel in the hallway, leaning against the peeling wall. He straightened up the moment he saw her, wiping sweat from his brow. "How did it go?" she asked gently. He forced a half-smile. "I got hired for day labor. We worked on hauling debris from a demolition site. It's temporary, but I earned some money." She noticed the scrapes on his knuckles, the fine dust coating his hair. "It must have been tough. Are you okay?" Daniel shrugged, trying to downplay the fatigue. "I'm fine. I've dealt with worse." They stepped inside, each bracing for the possibility that Mr. Carter might show up at any moment. Isabella took out her envelope of cash and counted the notes, a few short of what she needed. "Let me add what I have," Daniel said, pulling a handful of bills from his pocket. Isabella's heart constricted. She knew that money was the product of hours of grueling, sweaty labor. Yet, even combined, it still fell short of Mr. Carter's inflated demands. "What do we do now?" she whispered, the question more to herself than to Daniel. He rubbed the back of his neck as though wrestling with a decision. "Isabella, I may know someone. An old friend of mine who's currently in town. He owes me a favor. If I ask him for help, maybe I can get the rest of the money in time." She blinked in surprise. "A friend? You never mentioned you had friends here? It's complicated." His voice quivered with something that resembled shame. "I left a lot behind when I ended up on the streets, but I might be able to reconnect with him now." A swirl of questions welled up inside her. How does a beggar have connections that can offer substantial money? Why had Daniel never mentioned them before? Yet she also realized the precariousness of their situation. If they failed to pay Mr. Carter, they'd be out, homeless with nowhere to turn. Daniel's unusual proposition was better than nothing. "All right," she said slowly. "If you trust this friend, then I trust you." He inhaled, looking somewhat relieved. "Give me a day or two. I'll see what I can do." True to his word, the next morning Daniel left early, wearing the cleanest clothes he had, still shabby, but at least not torn. Isabella watched him go with a knot of worry in her chest. Throughout her shift at the bakery, she found it impossible to focus. She kept picturing Daniel wandering upscale parts of town, searching for an old acquaintance. Would he be scorned or turned away? What if his friend wasn't as loyal as he hoped? When night fell, Daniel still hadn't returned. Isabella ate a lonely dinner of bread and tomato soup, the same anxiety nibbling at her stomach. She tried to distract herself by tidying the small apartment, reorganizing a stack of old magazines on the shelf, anything to keep her thoughts from spiraling. It was close to midnight when the door finally creaked open. Daniel entered, shoulders slumped. He let out a long exhale as soon as he saw her, as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, though weariness was etched into every line of his face. I managed to speak with him. We came to an arrangement." His voice trembled with a mix of relief and embarrassment. "I can get the money, enough to settle your rent and keep you from eviction." Isabella's mouth fell open. "Daniel, that's... how? What did you—" He held up a hand, stopping her questions before they poured out in a rush. "It's not a loan," he explained. It was a matter of calling in an old debt. But that's all you need to worry about. Mr. Carter will get his payment tomorrow." She blinked away tears of gratitude. The idea that Daniel somehow had the means to produce this sum in such a short time felt almost unreal. But she was too exhausted, too desperate to question fate at that moment. She threw her arms around him in a grateful hug, words failing her. Daniel stood stiffly, arms at his sides, clearly not used to being embraced. Gradually he returned the hug, patting her shoulder with gentle caution. "It's all right," he whispered. "I told you. You shouldn't have to lose your home." Pulling back, Isabella brushed away a tear, feeling both relieved and uneasy. She noticed something in Daniel's expression, a heaviness, like he'd had to face a ghost from his past. She wanted to ask if everything was truly okay, but seeing the weariness behind his eyes, she held her tongue. "I'll pay Carter first thing in the morning," Daniel said. "Let's get some rest." Sleep came fitfully for Isabella that night. A swirl of questions about Daniel's mysterious favor kept her mind spinning. Who was this friend, and why did he owe Daniel so much? The puzzle pieces didn't add up. Was Daniel concealing more than just a simple backstory of bad luck and lost opportunities? Yet a deeper sense of reassurance took hold. She had spent her life believing in the power of kindness, in the idea that good deeds were never wasted. Now it seemed that life, through Daniel, was offering a glimmer of hope in her bleak world. The landlord could be dealt with, and she might finally breathe easy. Dawn broke with pale sunlight streaming through the curtains, and for the first time in weeks, Isabella didn't dread the day ahead. She woke to the murmur of voices in the hallway. Sliding out of bed, she peeked into the living room where Daniel was handing a plain white envelope to Mr. Carter, who stood by the door with his usual sneer. "This covers the back rent and all your fees," Daniel stated calmly, his voice resolute. "Now leave her alone." Mr. Carter counted the money, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He cast a glance at Isabella, who was lingering by the doorway, anxiety etched on her face. Then he let out a low grunt, stuffing the envelope into his pocket. I'll keep an eye on your lease renewal next month. Don't think a one-time payoff buys you any special favors," he said, stepping back into the hallway. "If anything's late again, you're out. Understand?" With that, he turned on his heel and lumbered off, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. Isabella exhaled so hard her chest felt hollow. She and Daniel exchanged looks, an odd blend of triumph and residual fear. She wanted to ask him a million questions about how he'd managed to pull this off, but for now, a sense of overwhelming relief flooded her. They were safe, at least for the moment. He offered a small smile. "Well, that settles that." She opened her mouth, searching for the right words, ones that might convey her gratitude. But before she could speak, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket, startling both of them. Isabella frowned slightly. She'd rarely seen him use a phone. He shot her a quick, unreadable look and muttered, "Sorry, I need to take this." Slipping outside, he answered the call. Isabella caught a fragment of his murmured conversation. Something about transfers and board meetings drifted through the cracked window, phrases that made no sense if he was simply a homeless man scraping by with day labor. Her pulse quickened. When he stepped back in, he noticed her concerned expression. Their eyes locked for an instant. In that moment, Isabella realized that whatever secrets Daniel carried were bigger than she had ever imagined. And though she had no idea what lay ahead, she sensed that her life was on the brink of a revelation that would change everything she thought she knew about him, and about the quiet power of kindness. Isabella spent the rest of that day in a heightened state of both curiosity and unease. The landlord's visit ended with the overdue rent finally paid, but the phone call Daniel received immediately afterward sent her thoughts racing. She couldn't dismiss the disquieting feeling that he was linked to something far beyond the life of a day laborer. 100 questions brewed in her mind. Who would be talking to him about board meetings or transfers? Why was he so guarded whenever she or anyone else pried into his past? As she headed to her midday shift at the bakery, Isabella turned the situation over and over in her head. She kneaded dough mechanically, shaping rolls without the usual joy she found in the comforting rhythm of baking. Even Mrs. Beatrice, who wasn't known for emotional insight, noticed Isabella's distraction. She insisted Isabella take her break a bit earlier than usual, perhaps hoping the pause would snap her out of her distant mood. Standing in the narrow alley behind the bakery, Isabella sipped lukewarm water from a plastic cup. She stared at the chipped bricks on the wall, remembering how Daniel's voice had dropped to a near whisper on the phone. She recalled how strange it was to find a so-called beggar with a functioning phone in the first place. Who paid for his service, and how? But then she pictured the gentle look in his eyes the night before, the earnestness with which he helped her keep her home, and the gracious care he offered in all the small daily ways. The swirl of uncertainties tangled with her gratitude. Trust was difficult, but she wanted to trust him. A sudden noise broke her reverie. She nearly dropped her cup as she spun around to see Mr. Green, the elderly regular from the bakery, stepping out from the side door. He raised a hand in apology for startling her. "Sorry, child. Didn't mean to sneak up on you," he said, adjusting the shabby tweed cap he always wore. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind." Isabella managed a half-smile. "Just life, I guess." He studied her face, eyes gentle but penetrating. "Sometimes life throws puzzles at us that only time can solve," he offered. "But if your gut tells you something is amiss, don't brush it aside." Swallowing hard, Isabella nodded. She wanted to confide in him. He was the closest thing she had to a sympathetic grandparent. But she also feared how her words might sound if she admitted she was sheltering a stranger with unknown secrets. So instead, she just said, "Thank you, Mr. Green. I'll keep that in mind." When her break ended, she forced herself to refocus on icing pastries. It was as if each swirl of cream or fondant repeated the questions clattering inside her head. By the time her shift was over, she felt as though she hadn't solved anything, only grown more anxious. Upon returning to her apartment building, she found Daniel perched on the stairwell, gazing out a grimy window that overlooked the busy street below. He looked troubled, shoulders tense, brows creased. She approached him slowly, uncertain of her welcome. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. He turned, the cloud in his expression clearing just slightly at the sight of her. "Yeah," he murmured. "Just thinking." Isabella set her handbag down at her feet. "About your phone call?" she prompted, swallowing the lump in her throat. Daniel hesitated, then spoke quietly. "It was an old colleague. He heard I was in town. There are things I need to handle, but they can't happen overnight. I'm sorry if it made you worry." She took a seat beside him on the narrow stair. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning fluid and stale cigarettes, but the relative privacy was enough for a frank conversation. "Daniel," she began, voice trembling with uncertainty, I don't want to pry. I'm grateful for everything you've done. You saved my home. You've been kind. But I'm confused." His gaze dropped to his clasped hands. "I know. You have every right to be." She drew a slow breath. "Are you in trouble? I mean, serious trouble? Because if you are, maybe we can find a way to get help." I just— Daniel lifted his head, eyes meeting hers with surprising steadiness. I'm not in legal trouble, he said softly. No criminal entanglements, no, it's more personal, family, business, complications I left behind when I walked away. Walked away from what? He paused so long she began to think he wouldn't answer. Then he finally exhaled, as though releasing a dam of pent-up tension. From a life I'd built that turned hollow. A corporate world where I lost sight of everything that mattered. And after a tragedy, I couldn't keep going the way I was. So I left it all. Isabella felt her heart pounding. She wanted to ask more. What tragedy? Why had he chosen to live on the streets? But the raw look in his eyes stopped her from digging too deep. Instead, she asked, "Does it have to do with the money you got for the rent?" He offered a faint nod. "Yes. I swore I'd sever ties, but a part of that world still owes me. I decided to claim enough to help you stay afloat. I figured it was about time some good came from what I left behind." Her hands shook slightly. "Daniel, I don't know what to say." He swallowed. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that it's all real. My reasons for coming here with nothing were my own, but I never planned to impose on you or put you at risk." Silence fell between them, heavy, but also oddly freeing. For the first time, she sensed a glimmer of truth about his background. He wasn't simply a beggar. He was someone who had discarded a wealthy or powerful life for reasons she still didn't understand. Yet the sincerity in his eyes, the quiver in his voice, told her he was carrying heartbreak. Something had driven him to flee. Eventually, Isabella placed a hand gently on his arm. "Thank you for trusting me with that. If you ever feel like telling me more, I'll listen. But if you want to keep it to yourself, I understand." A flicker of relief crossed his face. "I appreciate that," he said. "Truly." The hush of their moment on the stairwell was broken by footsteps from above, a neighbor returning with groceries. They rose, clearing the path, and retreated into her apartment. Over a makeshift dinner of rice and lentils, the conversation drifted to lighter topics: the demanding wedding cake order at the bakery or the hustle and bustle of the busy construction sites in town. Yet, a subtle shift had occurred between them. Isabella no longer saw Daniel as just a down-on-his-luck stranger. He was a man with a hidden past, bearing the weight of it as best he could. Meanwhile, Daniel observed Isabella's quiet strength, wondering how someone who had so little could maintain such unwavering warmth. That night, Isabella finally allowed herself to rest without obsessing over potential eviction. She slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Dawn arrived with a gentle glow through the window, and she woke to the unexpected sound of light knocking at her door. Normally, she would be anxious to see who was there so early, but the memory of Daniel's reassurance the previous evening made her brace for anything with a calm steadiness. She opened the door to find a delivery man in a crisp uniform, holding a medium-sized package. "Isabella Morgan?" he asked, checking the label. She nodded, perplexed. He handed her a clipboard to sign, then turned on his heel and left. She stared at the label. No return address, just her name scrawled on top. Curiosity churned in her stomach. Inside, Daniel stood by the couch, also looking puzzled. "Expecting something?" he asked. She shook her head, then carefully tore open the package. Its contents were layered beneath plain tissue paper, revealing a small stack of brand-new clothes, blouses, a light jacket, and a pair of trousers that looked about her size. Nestled among them was a sealed envelope. Isabella opened it to find a typed note. "You should never have to choose between basic dignity and paying your bills. With warm regards, a friend." She looked at Daniel in stunned confusion. "Did you?" He shook his head, equally dumbfounded. "I don't know who sent it." A wave of conflicting emotions rushed through her: gratitude, astonishment, and a pang of unease. Who would send her such items anonymously? She had never broadcast her struggles to the wider world, Only a few people, Mr. Green, maybe some kind neighbors, knew how tight things had been. But brand new clothes, well-tailored and with no explanation beyond that cryptic note, seemed suspiciously generous. Daniel carefully ran a hand over one of the blouses. The fabric was of good quality, certainly not something that came from the discount bins around her neighborhood. He frowned slightly, then turned to Isabella. "Do you think it could be from your boss at the bakery, or maybe Mr. Green?" She shook her head, thinking it through. "It's not Beatrice's style. She's too direct, and definitely not the type to hide behind a note. Mr. Green, I doubt he has the money for something this nice, plus he'd sign his name. He's not secretive." Daniel fell silent. She could almost see the cogs turning in his mind, connecting possibilities. Yet, as quickly as the suspicion arose, it seemed to flicker away. He offered a quiet smile, attempting to be reassuring. "Maybe it's just a well-meaning neighbor who noticed you needed a new jacket. We can't know for sure." Isabella touched the collar of the jacket, feeling both touched and unsettled. Perhaps in a different time she would have accepted the gift wholeheartedly, never looking back. But after the confusion of nearly losing her home and discovering Daniel's hidden ties to a wealthier world, nothing felt straightforward anymore. "Should I keep it?" she asked, half to herself. Daniel nodded. "I think you should. You deserve something decent. And maybe someone genuinely wants to help, just like you helped me." The sincerity of his statement made her smile. She folded the clothes back into the box, deciding to at least try them on later. They parted ways soon after, Isabella rushing to the bakery, Daniel to a day labor site. Yet, all day long, her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious package, the typed note, and the swirl of recent events that felt increasingly extraordinary. By mid-afternoon, she was in the bakery's back room, piping delicate frosting flowers onto a wedding cake. Beatrice stepped in, scanning the room with brisk efficiency before approaching Isabella's workstation. "You've done well on this order," she commented gruffly, which was as close to a compliment as she usually gave. "Thank you," Isabella said, forcing her hands to remain steady on the piping bag. She wanted to stay focused, but her mind strayed to Daniel's confessions, the anonymous gift, and the sense that her life was in flux. At least the unrelenting swirl of crisis seemed to have paused, replaced by a new puzzle. Beatrice eyed her for a moment, then spoke. "We have a few staff changes happening soon. Carmen is leaving next month. Means we'll have a spot in front of house, or maybe a promotion if you can handle more. Could be extra hours, possibly better pay." Isabella nearly dropped the piping bag. A promotion, no matter how modest, could make a big difference. It might be enough to start saving to keep her landlord off her back indefinitely. I would be honored. I'll work as hard as it takes," she said, excitement crackling in her voice. Beatrice nodded. "Finish that cake, then get started on the next batch of pastries. We'll talk details next week." The thought of a better future glimmered in Isabella's mind. Perhaps she and Daniel could finally move past the precarious existence they'd been sharing. She could pay rent on time, maybe even find a nicer place eventually, somewhere with fewer cracks in the walls and a little more space for Daniel. The idea warmed her heart, but also left her wondering if Daniel planned to stay that long. He'd mentioned facing family or business complications. What if he intended to vanish again once he settled whatever debt he was owed? That evening she returned home to find Daniel looking lost in thought, flipping through his worn notebook. She told him about the potential promotion, the brightness in her eyes shining like a beacon. He listened intently, then caught her off guard by suggesting they celebrate with something simple, like picking up a pizza from a cheap local place. With the day's tensions temporarily set aside, they ventured down to a small eatery a few blocks away. The neon sign buzzed overhead, half the letters dead, but the smell of melted cheese and tomato sauce made Isabella's stomach growl. It wasn't fancy, but sharing a humble meal together felt momentous in its own right. They settled at a corner table, battered menus in hand. Daniel insisted on paying from his day's wages. As they waited for their food, Isabella ventured a playful question, trying to lighten the lingering heaviness. "So if you were still in that old business life, you'd probably be eating at some posh rooftop restaurant, huh?" A fleeting look of sadness crossed his face. "Maybe. But it wouldn't taste as good as this is going to." She grinned, feeling the tension ease. When the pizza finally arrived, greasy and piled with toppings, both of them dug in with a relish that momentarily banished all cares. Laughter sparked between them as they recounted the day's small mishaps, from Isabella's nearly disastrous drop of a tray of pastries to Daniel's comedic attempt at loading cinder blocks in perfect symmetrical piles. For a while, it was easy to imagine they were just two ordinary people, living an ordinary life, with nothing to hide and nowhere else to be. And maybe that was enough for now. Yet deep within each of them, unspoken questions and secrets continued to simmer. The real test was on the horizon, a test of trust, loyalty, and the power of genuine kindness that had brought them this far and might yet carry them further than they dared to dream. For the next several days, life followed a gentle upward slope of cautious hope. Isabella threw herself into her bakery tasks with renewed purpose. Despite her ongoing curiosity about Daniel, she chose to focus on the small, tangible improvements around her. She was clocking extra hours with the potential promotion on the horizon, and while her landlord, Mr. Carter, remained his usual unsympathetic self, he no longer loomed as an immediate threat to her stability. Meanwhile, Daniel continued working day labor shifts. At odd intervals he disappeared for hours, sometimes returning with a pensive expression and an offhand explanation that he'd been running errands or meeting up with an old contact. But each time his pockets held enough money to contribute to groceries. When Isabella pressed him about his secret errands, he only assured her that it was for both their benefit. Though curiosity gnawed at her, she could see that, at least for now, he preferred a veil of secrecy over certain parts of his life. Every evening they shared simple meals, turning the cramped apartment into a space of genuine warmth. On one particular night, Isabella tried on the new clothes from the mysterious package. The jacket fit perfectly, almost unnervingly so, and the blouses and slacks felt soft against her skin. She caught Daniel's eye from across the room and offered a shy grin. "You look professional," he remarked, nodding in approval. "Could be good for the bakery's front-of-house position, right?" She spun around playfully. "If I get the job, maybe these will help me look the part. I still wish I knew who sent them, though." He shrugged, forced a smile, and let the topic drop. Deep down, Isabella suspected that Daniel had a guess about the package's sender, someone from his old life perhaps, but was choosing not to say. She resolved to let it lie. A sense of calm had settled over her existence, and she didn't want to shatter it with more questions, at least not yet. One morning, as Isabella prepared for work, she noticed Daniel lingering by the living room window checking his phone. He'd become increasingly confident in using it around her, though he often lowered his voice or stepped onto the landing if someone called. His gaze darted between the phone screen and the street below as though he were anticipating something. Or someone. "You're up early," she said, tugging at a stray thread on her blouse. "Everything all right?" He pocketed the phone. "There's a construction job starting earlier than usual. Figured I'd get there before the rest of the crew." He paused, hesitating. "Isabella, if someone shows up here asking for me while I'm gone, can you just tell them I'll be back later?" A ripple of unease traced along her spine. "Who'd be coming to look for you?" He offered a vague shake of his head. "Maybe no one. Just, if it happens, please do that for me." She searched his face. "Sure," she finally said, though her concern only deepened. He left, and a short while later she followed suit, grabbing her purse and hurrying to the bakery. The final day before the big wedding order felt more hectic than usual, with Mrs. Beatrice barking orders at the staff. Isabella's arms ached from kneading multiple batches of dough, while a co-worker frosted what felt like an endless line of cupcakes. In the midst of this hubbub, she found solace in the thought that soon the wedding chaos would be over. Maybe after that, Beatrice would sit down with her and finalize the front-of-house promotion. During her mid-morning break, she stepped outside for a breath of air. She was finishing a paper cup of coffee when she spotted a sleek black car cruising slowly down the street. An uncommon sight in this modest neighborhood. Instinctively, she noted its tinted windows and immaculate finish. Though it didn't stop near the bakery, a chill crept through her. Perhaps she was overthinking. After all, there were plenty of reasons a nice car might drive by, and no rules said fancy vehicles couldn't cross these streets. But as she resumed work, her thoughts circled back to Daniel's request that morning. Why was he worried someone might come looking for him? And what if they did? That afternoon, after finishing her shift, Isabella walked home, weaving her way through the usual hustle of vendors, parents collecting children from school, and the occasional stray cat rummaging through garbage bins. A block away from her building, she noticed the same black car parked at the curb. Her heart stuttered. The driver's side door was open, but no one sat inside. A creeping sensation of being watched pricked at her nerves. She forced herself to enter her building calmly, though her hands felt clammy on the banister as she climbed the stairs. To her surprise, the hallway outside her apartment was empty. She half expected a stranger in a tailored suit to be pacing there. She quickly let herself in and locked the door, exhaling relief. "Daniel?" she called, voice echoing in the quiet space. No answer. She guessed he was still at work. Determined to pass the time until he came home, she set about checking the fridge, considering what she could make for dinner. Supplies were running low, a couple of eggs, some wilted spinach, and a leftover handful of rice. She sighed, making a mental note to shop the next day. Might be an omelet tonight. That was when the knock came. Soft at first, then more insistent. She froze, fear twisting in her gut. Without a peephole in the door, she could only listen for some clue of who was outside. Another knock sounded, followed by a muffled male voice. "Ma'am, apologies for the intrusion, but I'm looking for someone." Her heart pounded. Daniel's warning rang in her ears. She cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice. Who are you looking for?" "I'm looking for a man named Daniel," came the polite yet firm reply. "I believe he's been staying here." Isabella's blood ran cold. She glanced around the apartment as if searching for a way out. But the only exit was the door. She reminded herself of Daniel's request. "If someone comes asking, tell them to come back later." "He's not here right now," she managed, aiming to keep her tone calm. "Can I take a message?" A brief silence followed, then, "I see. Well, would you let him know that Mr. Simmons needs to speak with him as soon as possible? It's urgent." Mr. Simmons. The name was unfamiliar to her, but the seriousness in the man's voice rattled her. "I'll tell him," she said, swallowing hard. "Much appreciated," replied Mr. Simmons. "Oh, and please let him know I'll be waiting near the entrance. He'll recognize me." She listened intently as footsteps retreated down the hallway. A second later, the building's front door clicked shut. Exhaling shakily, Isabella inched the door open just enough to peer outside. No one was there, at least not on her floor. She crept to the window at the end of the corridor and looked down to the street. Sure enough, the black car was still parked along the curb. A tall man in a sharp suit stood next to it, scanning the sidewalk with an air of impatient authority. Her legs felt weak. Urgent business indeed. Was this Simmons? A threat? A friend? The name alone suggested someone with ties to the corporate or high-stakes world Daniel had hinted about. Isabella retreated into her apartment, double-locking the door. She'd done as Daniel asked, sent the man away politely. Now she just had to wait until Daniel returned. The next hour crawled by, punctuated by the sound of her pacing footsteps. She tried to distract herself, rearranging the meager pantry items, trying on the new clothes once more, even scribbling a half-formed grocery list. She found herself checking the hallway window again and again, hoping Mr. Simmons would give up and leave. But each time she peered out, the man remained, occasionally glancing at his watch as if time was a resource he could scarcely spare. Finally, well past the usual dinner hour, Daniel arrived. Isabella heard his familiar tread climbing the stairs, though he moved more carefully than usual. She unlocked the door and opened it a crack, spotting him in the hallway. As soon as he saw her stricken face, he froze. "Isabella? What's wrong?" he asked, stepping inside. She closed the door behind him, keeping her voice low. "A man was here looking for you, calls himself Mr. Simmons. He's still waiting outside. Daniel, he's got that black car. He said it was urgent." Daniel's face drained of color. He dropped the small bag of groceries he was carrying onto the table, his movements stiff. "Simmons. I knew he might come, but not so soon. Who is he?" Isabella's voice trembled with the force of her concern. He acted polite, but it felt tense. Daniel's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions. Fear, resignation, maybe even a hint of anger. "He's connected to my old life. Someone with influence over the company I left behind, probably trying to drag me back in. Do you want me to tell him to go away? I'll go down with you if you want backup." He took her hand, gently squeezing it. "No, I need to speak with him. Hiding will only make things worse." She nodded, cheeks burning with anxiety. "Just be careful, please." Daniel grabbed his tattered notebook from the coffee table. "Stay in here. Lock the door behind me. If I'm not back in an hour, call the police. Or better yet, call Beatrice, anyone you trust. Promise me." Her mouth went dry. "Daniel, promise," he insisted. She nodded finally, and he offered a tight, grim smile. "Thank you. Don't worry. I'll handle this." With that, he stepped out into the corridor and disappeared down the stairs. Isabella closed and locked the door, just as he'd told her. Heart hammering, she pressed her ear to the wood, listening for echoes in the hallway. Nothing. Racing to the window at the end of the hall, she watched from a distance as Daniel exited the building, walking straight toward Mr. Simmons and the waiting black car. The moment they met, the tension was palpable even from her vantage point. Mr. Simmons gestured sharply, as if in admonition, while Daniel held his ground. Their words were lost to the street noise, but their body language spoke volumes. At one point, Daniel turned away, shaking his head in what appeared to be vehement refusal. Mr. Simmons stepped closer, his posture threatening. Isabella bit her lip to keep from crying out, her heart galloping. Then, without warning, Daniel opened the passenger door of the car. Perhaps he decided a private conversation was safer than shouting in the street. He slid inside and Mr. Simmons followed suit, closing the door behind him. The engine rumbled to life, and the car pulled away from the curb. Isabella watched until its taillights faded into the evening gloom, her stomach in knots. He was gone. She clutched her hands together, every minute detail of the last hour seared into her memory. Daniel's last words echoed in her mind. "If I'm not back in an hour, call someone you trust. Please let him come back soon," she prayed silently. Retreating into the apartment, she felt more alone than ever. For the first time in weeks, she had no idea where Daniel was or if he'd even be safe. The meager warmth they had built in this tiny home felt fragile now, threatened by forces she couldn't even name. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking a relentless countdown. All she could do was wait and hope, and wonder what secrets of Daniel's past might be forcing him into a confrontation that could change both their lives forever. Time seemed to crawl in agonizing increments after the black car drove off with Daniel. Heart pounding, Isabella spent the first 10 minutes pacing the apartment, every nerve on edge. She checked her phone repeatedly, though there was no reason to believe Daniel would call. He hadn't even given her Mr. Simmons's number, or any clue how to reach him. With trembling fingers, she filled a glass of water and forced herself to drink. Outside, the autumn dusk descended rapidly, casting the cramped living room into deepening shadow. She flipped on the overhead light, the single bulb flickering momentarily before stabilizing. It made her think of the precarious state of her life, flickering, uncertain, threatened by outside forces she barely understood. 30 minutes passed. Isabella tried to distract herself by organizing the meager groceries Daniel had dropped on the table earlier. She found a bag of rice, a few cans of vegetables, and a small jar of sauce, basics for a modest meal. Yet her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the jar. She set everything aside. Cooking would be impossible right now. Instead, she hovered by the window, peering into the street whenever a car's headlights cut through the gloom. Each time, her heart leapt, wondering if it was Daniel returning. But the vehicles either sped past or parked elsewhere, none with that distinctive black sheen. She cast glances at the clock on the wall, 40 minutes gone, then 50, then an hour. Still no sign of him. At the 60-minute mark, she recalled his urgent instructions. "If I'm not back in an hour, call someone you trust." Her throat constricted. Who should she call, though? The police? They wouldn't consider him a missing person yet. And how would she explain that he'd been whisked away by a well-dressed stranger? She didn't even know Daniel's full name or background, only that he'd left an influential life behind. Her boss, Beatrice, was probably still at the bakery finishing up last-minute details for the big wedding order. Mr. Green was kind, but he was just a retiree with no real power to help. Another 10 minutes of indecision passed. Finally, Isabella dialed the bakery's main number, hoping at least to speak to Beatrice. The phone rang multiple times before clicking over to the answering machine. No luck there. She shut her eyes, trying to breathe through rising panic. Should she venture outside and look for the black car? That felt dangerous and foolish. What if she found trouble instead of answers? Still, she couldn't just wait forever. Her stomach twisted painfully at the thought of Daniel in some unknown confrontation. She pictured his face when he asked her to promise she'd call for help. That unwavering seriousness was etched in her mind. Gathering courage, she slipped on her coat, the brand-new jacket from the mysterious package. The fact that it fit so perfectly gave her a small, strange sense of resolve. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway as she left the apartment, double-locking the door behind her. If she couldn't find real help, she might at least get some fresh air, scan the block, see if the black car had reappeared. Outside, the air was crisp and biting, the sky a velvety indigo. Streetlights glowed a weak yellow, illuminating the cracked sidewalks. Isabella walked the perimeter of her block, glancing down side streets for any sign of Daniel or Mr. Simmons. A few passers-by stared at her uncertainly, as if sensing her agitation. But no polished black sedan materialized, and no tall, commanding figure stepped from the shadows. She ended up at a small corner store. The fluorescent lights inside flickered, casting harsh patterns on the concrete. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Rosa, recognized Isabella from her occasional visits. "Something wrong, dear?" Rosa asked gently, noting the worry etched on Isabella's face. Isabella hesitated. She didn't want to spill everything to a near stranger, but the need to talk felt overwhelming. "I'm looking for someone, a friend. He left with a man in a black car. I'm worried." Rosa nodded sympathetically. "Expensive-looking black car, tinted windows?" "Yes," Isabella said, her hopes rising. "Did you see it?" Rosa pursed her lips, rummaging under the counter as if searching for some clue. "I saw one pass by an hour ago. It circled the block once, then headed toward the main road. Seemed in a hurry." She shrugged regretfully. "Didn't catch the plate number, though." That tidbit of information was meager, yet it confirmed that the car had indeed left the area. A coil of dread twisted in Isabella's gut. Who knew where they'd gone next? She thanked Rosa and wandered back out into the night, feeling more helpless than ever. Overwhelmed by a sense of futility, she returned to the apartment building. Climbing the stairs, she paused on each landing, half expecting to see Daniel waiting for her in the corridor. But the hall remained deserted, silent except for the faint hum of someone's television behind closed doors. Her heart hammered as she unlocked her own door, stepping into a space that suddenly felt too empty. With a shaky sigh, she sank onto the old couch. The single lamp in the corner provided a feeble glow. Her reflection stared back from the mirror on the opposite wall, a petite woman wearing a too-nice jacket, eyes filled with looming fear. Another hour passed, then another. She realized it was nearing midnight, her limbs heavy with exhaustion. Still, she refused to sleep in case Daniel returned. Instead, she busied herself by straightening up the coffee table, stacking Daniel's battered notebook with her own few books. She noticed he'd left a scribbled note on the top page. Redwood Holdings, Monbur 10 a.m.? She frowned, skimming the barely legible writing. Redwood Holdings? It sounded like a corporate entity. The mention of Monday at 10 a.m. felt like an appointment. Maybe that was the next step in his old business dealings. She tucked the note inside the notebook, feeling like an intruder into his secrets, but also desperate for any clue that might explain what was happening. Minutes bled into hours. Sleep tugged at her eyes, but she fought it off, determined to stay alert. Around 2 a.m., a noise in the hallway jolted her upright. She rushed to the door, pressing her ear to the wood. Footsteps, then a light, hesitant knock. Her pulse raced. "Who is it?" she called softly. "It's me," came Daniel's voice, low and drained. Relief flooded her. She fumbled with the locks, flinging open the door. There stood Daniel, shoulders slumped, an unmistakable weariness clouding his features. No black car was in sight, nor was Mr. Simmons anywhere behind him. He looked as though he'd aged a year in a single evening. Without a word, she pulled him inside, locking the door behind them. She gently guided him toward the couch. "Are you all right?" she finally asked, voice unsteady. He nodded, then winced as if even that small motion hurt. "I'm okay, just exhausted." Dark smudges ringed his eyes and his lip was slightly split, as though he might have been struck or had some scuffle. "Daniel!" she gasped, noticing the injury. Her heart twisted at the implication that things might have turned violent. "Let me get something for that." She hurried to the kitchen, returning with a damp cloth. He let her dab the cut gingerly, his eyes closed. Neither spoke for a moment, the apartment cloaked in near silence except for the rhythmic drip of the bathroom faucet in the next room. Eventually, Isabella found the courage to ask, "What happened?" Daniel exhaled shakily. "A confrontation with Simmons. He's working for someone else from my past. Someone who wants me back in the fold. Things got heated when I refused to cooperate." He opened his eyes, meeting hers. "Let's just say they tried intimidation." She swallowed hard. Did he threaten you?" "Threats, yes," Daniel murmured. "But it's complicated. They need me for a major business decision. Something about reactivating shares, signing off on deals, all the stuff I walked away from. They're determined to haul me back no matter what it takes." Isabella's mind reeled. "So you really were part of some big company?" He nodded, lips thinning. "It was a major corporation I co-founded years ago, Redwood Holdings. My father financed part of it, but after he passed, the board got messy. I left because it was tearing me apart. Too many betrayals and—" He paused, voice trembling. "Too many memories." Stunned, she placed the cloth on the coffee table. "So that means you're a shareholder? Possibly worth a lot of money?" Daniel laughed hollowly. "In theory, yes. But all that money felt worthless after the tragedy. I gave up everything. Didn't think they'd come chasing me, but Redwood is facing a crisis. They need a final signature to unlock certain funds, and I'm the missing puzzle piece." Isabella's heart ached at the haunted look in his eyes. "Daniel, you've been suffering on the streets while you had these resources?" "It's not that simple," he replied in a tormented whisper. When I lost my fiancé, my father died not long after. I couldn't stay in that world. It was suffocating. I walked away, convinced I'd rather be homeless than remain among those suits who value profit over people. She blinked back tears, realizing the depth of his pain. And now they want you to go back? They want my signature on a major deal. They'll do anything to get it, Daniel said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. Simmons said if I don't cooperate, they might target people close to me to force my hand. A chill darted down Isabella's spine. People close to you? He turned to her, eyes full of remorse and alarm. Yes, including you. That's why I had to go with him, to ensure your safety. Her stomach churned. She'd never asked for any of this. She only wanted to help a stranger in need. Now, that simple act of kindness had drawn her into a corporate battlefield. Daniel, she said softly, I'm not leaving you to face them alone, but I'm scared. He reached for her hand. I'd do anything to protect you. I never meant for this mess to fall on you. But if Redwood's board is desperate, they might keep pushing and pushing hard. Simmons made that clear. A tense silence wrapped around them, thick with the potential for disaster. Isabella rubbed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She thought of the wedding cake fiasco at the bakery, how enormous it had seemed just a day ago, yet how trivial it felt now compared to potential danger from powerful corporate enemies. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I should leave, he said, voice raw. It's the only sure way to keep you out of harm's reach. If I vanish again, truly vanish, maybe Redwood will move on. She shook her head vehemently. No, don't do that. Running won't solve the problem, and they might still find me, or keep an eye on me to lure you back. Maybe there's another way. His gaze flickered with a spark of gratitude, though it was laced with worry. I don't want to drag you deeper. But you're right. Simmons hinted they might keep tabs on you as leverage. Isabella's mind whirled. She had no blueprint for navigating corporate power struggles, but she believed in loyalty, in forging through adversity rather than running from it. Then we face them, she said, her voice shaky but resolute. We find a way to handle Redwood's demands while keeping us both safe. You don't have to sign away your soul. Maybe you can negotiate something that helps you walk away clean for good. Daniel exhaled a ragged breath, a glimmer of relief crossing his face. You'd stand by me? She squeezed his hand. I opened my door to you once, not knowing you at all. Now I care about what happens to you. Of course I'll stand by you. His eyes misted with emotion. Isabella, thank you. They sat in silence a while longer, exhaustion etched into their bones. At last he leaned back, head against the wall, eyes drifting shut. She quietly fetched a pillow and placed it under his head, then settled on the chair nearby. Neither had the energy to move to their respective beds. The apartment was hushed except for the steady tick of the clock. She watched Daniel's chest rise and fall, grateful he'd returned in one piece, terrified of what awaited them in the coming days. In that fragile pocket of calm, one truth shone clear. They would have to confront Redwood Holdings and the ruthless people behind it, head on. Their makeshift sanctuary in this rundown apartment had shielded them for weeks, but the outside world had finally broken through. All they had now was each other. In the darkness, Isabella silently prayed that this bond, rooted in compassion and a budding trust, would be enough to carry them through whatever storm was about to break. Morning arrived slowly, painting the walls of Isabella's apartment in soft, gray light. She stirred in the worn armchair, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. Across the room, Daniel was still dozing on the couch, an extra pillow under his head. He looked exhausted, even in sleep, eyelids flickering with whatever uneasy dreams haunted him. A pang of protectiveness rippled through Isabella's chest. Memories of the previous night tumbled back. Daniel's forced ride with Mr. Simmons, the bruised cut on his lip, and the revelation that Redwood Holdings was determined to reclaim him. Even now, that name felt monumental, like some distant corporate monolith overshadowing her modest life. And yet it wasn't so distant anymore. It had forced its way into her cramped living room, threatening the haven she and Daniel had created together. A dull ache tugged at her stomach, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the afternoon prior. She rose carefully, not wanting to disturb Daniel, and slipped into the kitchenette. Their food supplies were limited, just enough rice, lentils, and wilted spinach to make a small breakfast. Her mind drifted to the bakery. She was due in for another shift soon, but a swirl of anxiety left her unsure if she should leave Daniel alone, especially after last night's events. As if on cue, Daniel's voice broke the apartment's hush. "Isabella," he croaked, pushing himself upright. The look he gave her was a mixture of relief and lingering worry. "You're still here." She tried to smile. "I was about to cook something. Eggs, maybe, if we have any left." He nodded. "Let me help." They ended up side by side at the stove, boiling water for rice and chopping vegetables. The morning had a subdued quality, as if both were too drained to speak of Redwood or Simmons yet. Nonetheless, the question simmered in the back of Isabella's mind. Had Daniel decided what to do next? Halfway through their makeshift meal, she mustered the courage to ask, "Daniel, about Redwood, do you have a plan? Because if we wait too long, who knows what they'll try?" He set down his spoon, the tension back in his posture. "Simmons wants an answer by Monday morning. He demanded I meet with him at some hotel downtown. They're holding a special board session. I guess the executives are flying in." Isabella's breath caught. "That's only a couple of days from now." "Yeah," Daniel replied grimly. "He said if I don't show, they'll interpret my absence as refusal, and I suspect they'll escalate their tactics." He pressed his lips into a tight line. "He also warned me that accidents happen when people refuse Redwood's demands." She winced at the clear implication. "We can't just walk blindly into a trap." His gaze lifted to hers. "I know, but I'm not sure we have many options. If I show up, maybe I can negotiate, force them to let me sign the paperwork on my terms. If I don't go, they might retaliate." A feeling of helplessness threatened to overwhelm her. Isabella had spent her life dodging threats of eviction, scraping by with long hours at the bakery. Now, a conflict she never asked for was thrust upon her, and it was far bigger than any landlord's ultimatum. "I'll support you, whatever you decide," she said quietly. "But please don't do anything reckless." He reached for her hand across the small table. "I promise. Maybe we can strategize, figure out how I can protect you and stand up to Redwood at the same time." Their eyes met, and she felt a surge of warmth that momentarily pushed aside the anxiety. In some strange way, the crisis had knitted them closer, forging a bond of loyalty neither had anticipated. She squeezed his hand, silently vowing not to let Redwood or anyone else tear that bond apart. Before she could say more, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up to see a text from her boss, Beatrice. "Don't forget today's shift. Need you here ASAP to finalize the wedding order. Don't be late." Isabella grimaced. "Work?" Daniel asked, reading her expression. She nodded. "I have to go. We're swamped with wedding pastries. I'm on the edge of a promotion, so I can't risk it." A shadow of understanding passed over his features. "You can't lose your job. Not now." "Exactly," she sighed. "But I'm worried about leaving you here alone. What if Simmons comes back?" Daniel considered this. "I'll lie low today. Maybe look for a safer spot in case we need to relocate. But if it'll ease your mind, I'll keep my phone on and text you regularly." She handed him a spare key. "I know it's silly, but if you leave, just lock up and be careful." His fingers closed around the key. "I will." With that, she grabbed her jacket, stuffed a few essentials into her handbag, and headed out the door. The hallway was quiet, though each step echoed with her lingering fears. As she walked toward the bakery, the crisp air failed to soothe her rattled nerves. She replayed the conversation about the Monday meeting, worrying that Redwood's threats could intensify at any moment. At work, the usual flurry of tasks enveloped her: rolling dough, piping decorations on an endless row of cupcakes, handcrafting delicate sugar flowers for the towering wedding cake. Yet her mind wandered incessantly to Daniel. Did Redwood's minions know where he was? Would they come after him again while she was stuck here? Beatrice's stern voice snapped her back into focus. "Isabella, the bride wants an extra tier of red velvet at the last minute. Move fast." She forced a nod, burying her stress beneath the familiarity of baking. Hour by hour, the wedding order inched closer to completion, yet the knot in her stomach refused to unwind. She kept an eye on her phone, half dreading and half hoping for any message from Daniel. By midday, he did text, brief but reassuring. "All good. Looking into safe options for Monday. We'll explain tonight." She stared at the screen, exhaling a bit of relief. The bakery thrummed with activity until late afternoon. At last, they finished loading the wedding pastries into a delivery van. Beatrice, sweaty and flour-dusted, mustered a tight smile at Isabella. "Good work. The client's satisfied. You can head home." Isabella perked up, checking the clock. She'd worked several hours beyond her standard shift. Hopefully that would translate into overtime or bolster her chances at the front-of-house role. "Thank you, Mrs. Beatrice. I appreciate it." Beatrice's gaze softened marginally. "You've earned it. But be back early tomorrow. We open for normal sales at 6. Tucking her apron away, Isabella left with a mix of exhaustion and relief. Outside, the sky glowed with the warm light of a late afternoon sun. She decided to pick up some groceries before heading home, hoping to bring a semblance of normalcy to dinner. Entering the small neighborhood market, she tossed a few vegetables, pasta, and a bag of beans into her cart. As she browsed the fruit aisle, she overheard two elderly women murmuring about a black car that had been seen circling the block again. Anxiety spiked. Was Redwood still surveilling the area? Her heart hammered as she paid for her items, eyes darting to the windows. She saw no sign of an ominous vehicle, so she hurried out onto the sidewalk and walked briskly. Every glance over her shoulder felt like stepping into a spy novel. But her street seemed quiet enough. No suspicious silhouettes, no tinted luxury sedans. She reached her building's stairs breathless, the bag of groceries cutting into her hand. Fumbling with her keys, she opened the apartment door and froze at the sight that greeted her. Daniel pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, tension radiating from his stance. She shut the door quietly, setting down her groceries. Daniel looked up, meeting her gaze with an urgent flicker. "Yes, I understand," he said into the phone. "I just need assurance that you can guarantee her safety if I sign." A pause, then, "That's not enough. I need more than your word. Put it in writing." Isabella's breath caught. It sounded like he was negotiating with Redwood or someone representing them. She hovered anxiously, waiting for Daniel to finish. Finally, he ended the call with a terse, "Fine. Email the documents." "What happened?" she asked, voice trembling. He sank onto the couch. "They're pushing me to attend the Monday meeting, trying to sweeten the deal by offering me partial control over Redwood's philanthropic branch. Something to do with an image boost. But they won't promise not to target you if I back out." Her head throbbed. "This is insane. Can't we go to the authorities?" His lips curled into a humorless smile. "I doubt the police will help with corporate intimidation, especially since Redwood's folks operate in legal gray areas. They're too powerful, and we don't have concrete proof of threats. It's our word against theirs." She slumped beside him. "Then what's our plan?" "I've been researching Redwood's legal structure," he said, tapping his phone. "If I can corner them on a technicality, force them to sign a separate agreement guaranteeing no harm to you, maybe that can be a lever. As soon as that's in place, I'll put my signature on the big deal they want." A swirl of emotions buzzed inside her. Relief that Daniel had a plan, fear that Redwood's people might not honor any written promise, and admiration for his resolve. "You really think they'll agree?" He exhaled slowly. "They need me too badly to risk saying no, but let's not be naive. Once I sign, there's a risk they'll renege. That's why I also want to keep a backup plan." Isabella nodded. "Like what?" His phone buzzed again. He checked the screen, grimacing. "Simmons wants a meeting tomorrow to finalize details." He looked at Isabella with apology etched on his face. "That's Sunday. I'll probably have to go alone." Her chest tightened. "No, let me come. Or maybe I can at least wait nearby." Daniel closed his eyes, considering. "Nearby, maybe, but not at the table with them. I don't want them to see you as leverage. If they realize how important you are to me—" He trailed off, finishing the thought silently. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, anger flaring. All she'd tried to do was help a stranger. Now she was forced into danger because corporate sharks were fighting over Daniel's signature. Yet despite the fear, she couldn't turn away. "All right, I'll stand by you, but carefully." He covered her hand with his. "Thank you. I'll figure out a meeting place with Simmons that's public and safe. Then, if something goes wrong, you can call for help." She forced a brave nod, though her insides quivered. "We'll prepare then." He offered a tentative smile, the dark circles beneath his eyes a reminder of how quickly their world had shifted. Gathering her own courage, Isabella began unpacking the groceries, trying to re-establish a sense of normalcy, however fleeting. The smell of fresh produce and the snap of plastic bags felt absurdly mundane against the backdrop of looming threats. Yet, as they moved around the kitchenette, setting vegetables on the counter for dinner, an unspoken understanding flowed between them. Come Sunday, they would face Redwood's emissaries. It might be the final step before Monday's showdown, or it could be a trap. Either way, they had to stand together. And so, in the dim glow of the single overhead bulb, they prepared a humble meal of pasta and tomato sauce, forging a quiet resoluteness. Each moment felt precious, each mundane task a fragile reminder that beyond these walls, powerful adversaries maneuvered in suits and tinted cars. But here, at least, in this little apartment, they had something Redwood could never truly buy: genuine loyalty and a shared hope that human decency could still triumph. Sunday dawned crisp and clear, but neither Isabella nor Daniel took much comfort in the pleasant autumn sky. Their apartment felt charged with anticipation. Today was the day Daniel was set to meet Mr. Simmons again, presumably to hash out the final terms Redwood demanded. If all went according to plan, the outcome would either provide them with some semblance of safety and negotiation power, or tighten Redwood's stranglehold on their lives. They ate a silent breakfast, coffee with stale bread and a bit of jam. Isabella could hardly taste anything. Her stomach was knotted with nerves. Daniel, for his part, seemed lost in thought, glancing at his phone every few minutes, waiting for confirmation about the meeting location from Simmons. Finally, around 8 in the morning, the phone buzzed. Daniel read the incoming text with a furrowed brow. "He wants me at the Lakeside Cafe at noon, says it's a public place, so I shouldn't be worried about any tricks." His voice dripped with skepticism. Isabella nodded slowly. "Public is good, right? At least they can't try anything too brazen." "Maybe," Daniel conceded, "but Redwood has deep pockets. Brazen can sometimes be done discreetly if you're powerful enough. Still, it's better than meeting in some deserted office or alley." They agreed that Isabella would accompany him but stay a block or so away from the cafe. The idea was to keep her out of sight, less tempting for Redwood to target if they didn't know how intimately she was involved, yet close enough that if Daniel didn't emerge or signaled distress, she could call for help. "What if they see me anyway?" she asked, frowning. Daniel gently placed a hand on her arm. "I'll choose a table near the window. If something goes wrong, I'll give you a sign. Maybe I'll stand up abruptly or remove my jacket. Then you call the police or anyone who can intervene." She swallowed hard. All right, I can do that. Time seemed to drag as they prepared. Daniel changed into the least tattered shirt he owned and a pair of pants that at least didn't show paint stains. Isabella dabbed the small cut on his lip with antibiotic ointment and a bandage. He still looked tired, but determined. His battered notebook tucked under his arm, Daniel slipped it into a worn messenger bag, a curious blend of ex-corporate and everyday survival. They left the apartment around 11:15, taking a bus to the Lakeside district. Isabella fought back growing anxiety as they rattled through streets that gradually became nicer, leafy boulevards, renovated storefronts, and well-kept parks. A few stops before the cafe, she bid Daniel a tense goodbye and got off, letting him continue to the final stop on his own. "Be careful," she whispered, her hand lingering in his. He nodded, face grim. "You too." After the bus pulled away, she hurried on foot, cutting across a manicured park. The Lakeside Cafe stood near the water's edge, its outdoor tables offering a picturesque view of the calm blue lake. Despite the lovely setting, Isabella's nerves jangled with each step. She paused near a small fountain, scanning the cafe from a distance. Patrons sipped coffee beneath bright umbrellas. Some had dogs lying at their feet. Others chatted happily with family. It all looked so normal. But somewhere in there, Redwood's agent would be waiting like a shark in placid waters. Spotting Daniel's figure, broad-shouldered despite his ragged clothes, she felt both relief and dread. He stepped onto the cafe's patio and chose a table in full view of the sidewalk. Isabella circled around to a bench near a row of trees. From there, she had a decent vantage point without being obvious. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared passers-by might hear it. She saw a tall man in a sharp suit approach Daniel's table. Mr. Simmons. The same man she'd glimpsed outside her apartment building. Even at this distance, she could sense the tension in their postures. Daniel stiff, Simmons exuding controlled confidence. They exchanged words, a clipped greeting. Then Daniel set his messenger bag at his feet. She caught a glimpse of them ordering something from the cafe's menu, maybe to keep appearances. With every passing minute, Isabella's pulse soared. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "I see him. No sign of extra muscle yet. We'll keep you posted." She typed back a quick "stay safe" and resumed her watch. Over the next 20 minutes, the pair engaged in subdued conversation. At times, Simmons gestured broadly, leaning forward as though insisting on a point. Daniel remained calmer, arms often crossed. She wondered if they were discussing contract terms, the philanthropic branch, or Redwood's demands. Occasionally, Daniel pulled out his notebook, flipping pages with controlled deliberateness. Simmons tapped something into a tablet, perhaps referencing Redwood's digital files. A typical corporate negotiation, except Daniel's life and Isabella's safety hung in the balance. Her sense of foreboding mounted when a second man in a blazer joined their table. He had the air of an attorney or executive, dark hair slicked back. They shook hands stiffly. The conversation intensified, occasionally crossing an emotional threshold. Isabella saw Daniel's hand curl into a fist on the table. She couldn't hear a word, but every fiber of her being screamed that Redwood was making demands Daniel might consider unacceptable. She forced herself to remain still, recalling the plan. Only intervene if Daniel gave the signal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw the new man produce a folder. Papers were spread across the table, and Daniel leaned over them, scanning each page. Simmons pointed at something, apparently explaining a clause. Daniel shook his head with a firm motion, flipping to another page, scribbling notes in the margins. The negotiation went on for another 15 minutes. A small pang of hope eased Isabella's fear. Maybe Daniel's stance was holding. Maybe Redwood was conceding to his conditions. For a moment, her heart lifted. If Redwood agreed to keep her out of their intimidation tactics, maybe Daniel could sign the documents and break free at last. But abruptly, Simmons stood, face dark with anger. He slapped the folder shut, and the second man jerked in surprise. Daniel stood too, matching their tension. Hands moved in sharp gestures, Simmons pointing at Daniel's chest, Daniel pushing the folder aside. The lawyer type tried to intervene, hands raised in a placating manner. Isabella's muscles tensed. It looked as if all progress had collapsed. Her mind whirred. Should she approach or keep waiting for the signal? Then, so quickly she almost missed it, Daniel stepped back and removed his jacket, tossing it onto the back of the chair. His eyes flickered toward the sidewalk, scanning. He didn't make eye contact with Isabella, but the gesture was unmistakable, the sign they'd agreed upon. Her adrenaline spiked, nearly knocking the breath from her lungs. That was her cue to call for help. But who? The local police, who might dismiss it as a business argument? She recalled Daniel's preference for a third party, someone who might at least show up quickly. Searching her phone's contacts with shaking fingers, she realized how few people she could rely on. Beatrice was the only figure of authority she knew in this part of town, though it felt ridiculous to call a bakery owner for a potential threat. Still, her phone rang before she could decide. She answered in a whisper, "Daniel?" His voice was tight. "They're trying to force me to sign a new version of the contract, claiming there's no time for changes. I said no. They threatened more direct methods if I don't comply immediately. Listen, I need—" His words cut off, replaced by muffled scuffling. Then Daniel's voice barked, "Let go!" Another rough sound, a clang of metal chairs. The line went dead. Fear shot through Isabella's veins. She sprang from the bench, scanning the cafe frantically. The scene had erupted into chaos. Simmons and the lawyer stood flanking Daniel, who seemed pinned in place. Other patrons backed away, alarmed. One or two reached for phones, presumably to call the police or film the altercation. Isabella's mind screamed to run forward, but Daniel's warning about Redwood's cunning froze her. If she charged in, she might become their perfect hostage. Instead, she forced her trembling legs to move along the perimeter, inching closer for a better view. She caught a glimpse of Daniel twisting out of Simmons's grip, knocking the man's arm away. The lawyer stepped back, shouting something about keeping it civil. Within seconds, a security guard, likely the cafe's private hire, rushed over, shouting for them to break it up. Simmons straightened, smoothing his suit, adopting an air of offended calm. Daniel stood rigid, chest rising and falling, fists clenched. The lawyer was the only one who seemed genuinely rattled, adjusting his tie with shaking hands. Then, as if to diffuse the tension, Simmons reached into the folder and yanked out a few pages, brandishing them at Daniel. The guard intervened, telling them all to settle the argument outside. Daniel cast a final glare at Simmons, grabbed his jacket, and marched away from the patio. Isabella hurried behind a row of parked cars, not wanting to be spotted yet. Simmons followed Daniel onto the sidewalk, the lawyer trailing after them. She crouched near a car, heart pounding. Only a few yards away, the men squared off again, though they kept their voices low. She strained to hear snippets. "Not safe for her if you refuse," from Simmons, and "I won't sign under threats," from Daniel. The lawyer hissed about legal ramifications, something about Monday's vote. Then, in a move that left Isabella trembling with rage, Simmons spat a final threat. "Fine, Redwood will adapt, but don't say we didn't warn you." With that, Simmons snapped the folder shut, whirled around, and strode off. The lawyer gave Daniel a final beseeching look, then trotted to catch up with his associate. The pair slipped into a sleek sedan parked on the opposite side of the street, different from the black car Isabella recognized, but just as imposing. Moments later, they sped away, leaving Daniel standing alone on the sidewalk, shoulders heaving with pent-up aggression and fear. Isabella let them vanish around the corner before stepping out from her hiding place. "Daniel!" she called, voice shaky. He turned, relief flooding his features. "You saw?" She rushed to him, glancing around to ensure Redwood's men were truly gone. "I saw enough. Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" He flexed his right hand, which was shaking. Simmons grabbed me, tried to force me to sign. Nothing major. I'm fine. They left these. He held up a few wrinkled sheets from the folder, pages covered in dense text and legal jargon. They want my signature by tomorrow morning, or... He swallowed. Let's just say the threats stand. A swirl of helplessness and anger filled her. They're crossing every line of decency. This is insane. Daniel nodded, raking a hand through his hair. I refused to sign anything under duress. I demanded they guarantee in writing no harm to you. They refused. So, we're at a standstill. Her heart twisted. Then Monday's meeting is going to be worse, isn't it? He exhaled shakily. Probably, but they're desperate, which gives me some leverage. They can't close their big deal without me. Isabella stood close to him, the cafe's bustle drifting from behind them. Daniel, maybe we should vanish, just for a few days, until Redwood sorts itself out. Even as she said it, she knew Redwood's reach might extend further than any place they could hide. He shook his head. We can't run forever, and Redwood's men might retaliate if we vanish. They'll look for you at the bakery, or worse. His gaze flicked over her, pained. I won't let them turn you into a target. She swallowed the rising lump in her throat. Then we have to see this through. Yeah, he breathed, folding the wrinkled pages. We have one last move. Show up at that Monday board meeting with our own demands. If Redwood wants my signature, they have to legally and publicly guarantee they'll leave you in peace. No manipulations, no intimidation. I'll get it in writing with an attorney present. Her mind spun. An attorney? We can't afford... I might know someone from my past who still has integrity. He owes me a favor, Daniel said. Let me make a call. If he agrees, he can act as my counsel tomorrow. A faint spark of hope flickered inside her. That could work, right? A third party present might keep Redwood from trying anything violent. Daniel nodded. It's our best shot. They stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the day's tension, neither quite ready to move. Then, quietly, he tucked the documents back into his messenger bag. Let's get out of here, he murmured, his voice trembling with an overload of adrenaline. We'll regroup at home. Home. Isabella realized with a jolt how that cramped apartment had become their sanctuary, however fragile. She let Daniel guide her away from the cafe, weaving through the confused stares of onlookers. The sun was high overhead, but the warmth did little to calm her. Redwood's shadow lay over them, stark and threatening. Monday was less than a day away, and they were about to confront a powerful corporation that wouldn't hesitate to ruin lives for profit. Yet as they boarded a bus back to their neighborhood, Isabella found a thread of comfort in the determined set of Daniel's jaw and the way he gently rested his hand over hers. Their bond, forged in kindness and tested by a ruthless corporate machine, was what gave her strength. Perhaps together they could face Redwood's wrath and maybe, just maybe, come out on the other side with their dignity and future intact. Sunday evening arrived with a sense of clammy tension in the apartment. The overhead light buzzed faintly, an unwanted reminder of how fragile everything felt. Isabella and Daniel sat at the rickety kitchen table, studying the wrinkled contract pages Redwood had shoved at him during the confrontation. A printed email on Daniel's phone, the reply from his old acquaintance, lay beside them. He said he'll come tomorrow, Daniel murmured, pressing a hand over his exhausted eyes. My friend's name is Jonathan Kwan. He's not a corporate lawyer, more of a general counsel, but he has enough background to help. He agreed to meet us at Redwood's main office at 9. Isabella's stomach churned. That's an hour before the board session? Yes, Daniel confirmed. It gives us time to strategize, finalize any conditions I want to present. We'll show Redwood we're not walking in unprepared. She gripped her mug of tea, drawing warmth from it. Do you think Redwood might pull another trick before then? Try to grab you again? He exhaled. It's possible. but they're likely saving their energy for the big vote. Simmons probably told them to expect me in the morning. Still, we can't let our guard down." They exchanged a loaded glance. So many unspoken fears clung to the air. Redwood's capacity for intimidation, the risk that even an official agreement might be worthless in the hands of corporate sharks, and the possibility that walking into Redwood's headquarters was akin to stepping into a cage with lions. Yet both knew turning back wasn't an option. Over a sparse dinner of canned soup and bread, Daniel laid out his plan. Arrive at Redwood early with Jonathan Kwan. Demand a revised contract that included a legally binding clause ensuring Isabella's safety and protecting her from retaliation. Only sign if Redwood's top executives signed that clause in front of witnesses. "Without it, I walk," Daniel said, voice firm. "They'd have to scramble to salvage their deal, and time's not on their side. That's my leverage." Isabella nodded, though fear rippled in her chest. "And if they refuse?" He tightened his jaw. "Then I still walk. We'll leave the city, go somewhere they can't easily find us. I won't be strong-armed into doing business with them." She wondered if Redwood might punish them for that, but Daniel's assurance that Redwood urgently needed him was the only solace she clung to. "All right," she whispered. "Then I'll stand by you no matter what. I'll be there tomorrow, right? Or do you want me to wait at home?" Daniel reached for her hand. "I'd feel better if you stayed behind. But Redwood already knows you matter to me, so maybe you should be present, under the watchful eye of my lawyer and any witnesses. It might make Redwood more cautious. Plus, I want you to see them sign your protection clause in person." A tremor ran down her spine, yet she found herself nodding. "Then I'll come. We'll face them together." A solemn hush settled. Isabella swallowed, trying to shake off the mental image of Redwood's imposing boardroom, a place where deals were signed with gold pens and fortunes were made or destroyed. She pictured a row of executives in tailored suits, eyeing her with cold curiosity. But if it meant ensuring she and Daniel could live freely afterwards, she would do it. They turned in early, though neither slept well. Isabella tossed and turned, haunted by nightmares of suits and tinted vehicles. She awoke at least 3 times, heart pounding, checking the clock to see if dawn had arrived. Each time she glimpsed Daniel, he seemed equally restless, twisting the pillow beneath his head or thumbing through the battered notebook in the faint glow of the streetlight outside. At 5 a.m., she finally gave up on sleep. Rising quietly, she brewed coffee and stared at the swirling steam, mind drifting to the first day she'd met Daniel. Dirty, exhausted, sitting on the curb near her local store. She'd never imagined that single act of kindness would lead to corporate showdowns and threats. Yet, here they were. She refused to regret it, though. Helping Daniel was right. By 6, they were dressed. Isabella opted for one of the nicer outfits from the mystery package, a crisp blouse and modest skirt, hoping it might give her an edge of confidence. Daniel wore the cleanest slacks he had, along with a second-hand dress shirt that was slightly too big, but presentable when tucked in. A tinge of anxiety flickered in her as they stepped outside. The city had only just begun to stir, and the air felt charged like a hush before a storm. They caught an early bus, quiet with commuters heading to office jobs or morning shifts. No one spared them more than a passing glance, oblivious to the high-stakes drama hidden behind Daniel's tense posture and Isabella's fidgeting hands. At each stop, she scanned the street for suspicious cars or Redwood agents, but none appeared. They reached downtown, a forest of gleaming glass towers and polished sidewalks. Isabella's heart lurched as she spotted Redwood's main building, a skyscraper with massive steel letters, Redwood Holdings, etched along a sleek facade. Even the air here felt different, sharp, businesslike. Her nerves flared. It was like stepping onto an entirely different battlefield than the modest bakery or her cramped apartment. At the base of the skyscraper, Jonathan Kwan waited, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He looked mid-40s with silver at his temples and a calm, serious demeanor. Daniel introduced them quickly. Jonathan gave Isabella a reassuring nod. "We'll do everything above board," he promised. "No matter Redwood's reputation, they must follow the law, especially with a witness like you." They entered the lobby, air-conditioned and vast, where polished marble floors and security turnstiles gleamed under bright lights. A stern receptionist scanned their IDs. When Daniel stated his name, her expression flickered. Apparently, Redwood had told the front desk to expect him. She pressed a button, murmured into a phone, and then waved them through. Inside the elevator, tension coiled tighter in Isabella's gut. She could barely breathe. Daniel reached for her hand, a silent anchor. Jonathan cleared his throat, flipping through some final notes. "I'll lead the conversation. Try to keep Redwood from pulling any fast ones," he said. "Stay calm, both of you. The more rational we appear, the harder it is for them to intimidate." The elevator doors slid open onto the topmost floor. A plush foyer awaited, thick carpet absorbing their footsteps. The receptionist here was older, impeccably dressed, and motioned them to a large boardroom behind frosted glass. "They're waiting," she said, tone clipped. With a bracing breath, Daniel pushed open the door. Isabella's heart felt like a drum in her ears. The boardroom was expansive. High ceilings, a gleaming mahogany table surrounded by chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Seated around the table were half a dozen individuals in tailored suits, papers, and laptops at the ready. At the head, a man with silver hair, clearly one of Redwood's key figures. Simmons stood nearby, arms folded, all eyes swiveled to the newcomers, some expressionless, some curious, a few openly hostile. The silver-haired man stood, extending a hand. "Daniel," he said in a smooth voice, "we've awaited your arrival." Daniel shook his hand reluctantly. "Andrew." Isabella guessed this was Andrew Cole, Redwood's acting CEO. The tension in their greeting was palpable. Jonathan moved forward, introducing himself as Daniel's legal counsel. Without skipping a beat, Andrew Cole indicated a row of chairs at the table's far end. "Take a seat," he said, voice businesslike. "We have much to discuss and limited time." They settled in. Isabella felt dwarfed by the table's grandeur, the cityscape framed behind Redwood's executives. Andrew Cole cleared his throat. "We trust you've reviewed the contract. We need Daniel's signature to proceed with a major acquisition. The board vote will finalize it within the hour." Daniel exchanged a glance with Jonathan. "I have conditions." Andrew didn't blink. "We're open to hearing them, if they don't derail what Redwood must accomplish." Jonathan spoke up, calm but firm. "Mr. Adams requires a legal guarantee that Ms. Morgan," he gestured toward Isabella, "will not be harassed, threatened, or harmed by Redwood or its associates in perpetuity." A ripple of murmurs spread among the executives. Simmons snorted quietly. Andrew's expression hardened. "Is that truly necessary? Redwood is a reputable firm. We have no desire to harm innocent bystanders." Daniel pressed his lips together. "You and I both know Redwood's methods. I want it in writing, binding. If you refuse, I walk." Silence weighed on the room. Then Andrew let out a clipped laugh. "Bold, Daniel. Very well, we can draft a non-harassment clause, but Redwood insists on your signature for the full deal. No partial terms, no separate side deals. You sign, we incorporate your clause, and Redwood proceeds with the acquisition smoothly." Simmons leaned forward, eyes cold. "We've already wasted too much time. The shareholders are restless. Either we finalize this now or Redwood moves on, with or without you." Jonathan arched a brow. "Legally, Redwood can't finalize the acquisition without Daniel's shares. You need his sign-off. Let's not pretend otherwise." A fleeting flicker of annoyance crossed Simmons's face, but Andrew Cole intervened, nodding to a younger executive who tapped furiously on a laptop. Within moments, a fresh document materialized on the board's shared screen. It was Redwood's main contract with a new section labeled Non-Harassment and Safety Guarantee. Isabella's pulse quickened as she spotted her own name spelled out, Redwood Holdings. Its subsidiaries and affiliates shall not, under any circumstance, engage in or commission direct or indirect harassment, intimidation, or harm to Ms. Isabella Morgan. Her mind swam, half disbelieving that such a clause was even necessary in a civilized world. But Redwood's track record made it essential. While Andrew instructed the young executive to finalize the text, Daniel scanned each line carefully, Jonathan offering occasional legal clarifications. At last, Andrew turned to Daniel, voice clipped. You have your guarantee. Sign, and Redwood has what it needs. We'll countersign in front of the board. Daniel picked up a sleek pen from the center of the table. His gaze flicked to Isabella, worry and hope swirling in his eyes. She gave a tiny nod. This was their best shot at safety. He pressed the pen to paper, signing his name on both the main agreement and the newly appended clause. Andrew Cole then signed for Redwood, and several other board members followed suit, including Simmons, whose expression was stony as he scribbled his signature. The tension in the room did not ease, but at least a formal agreement now existed. Jonathan gathered the signed copies, verifying the ink. We'll keep an original. Redwood keeps an original. Each has legal force. Breaking it would incur civil and potential criminal liability. Andrew inclined his head. Redwood has no intention of breaking it. This was always about business, not personal vendettas. A flicker of disdain crossed Daniel's face, but he kept quiet. For a moment, Isabella dared to hope that this was over. She studied the executives. Some typed on laptops. A few quietly conferred about the next steps in their acquisition. The sense of danger still lingered, but perhaps Redwood's formal promise would hold them at bay. Andrew Cole cleared his throat, addressing Daniel directly. Our board vote starts shortly. With your signature, Redwood can move forward. We appreciate your cooperation. Daniel stood, pocketing the contract copy. Jonathan followed suit. Isabella remained silent, relief fluttering in her chest. They had done it. They'd forced Redwood to vow they'd leave her unharmed in black and white. It wasn't an ironclad guarantee Redwood would abide, but it was miles better than the intimidation tactics that had ruled the last few days. Simmons hovered near the door as they left, eyes narrowed. Congratulations, Daniel. You're back in Redwood's ranks, whether you like it or not. Daniel paused. I'm only here to sign. Don't mistake that for me returning to your corporate fold. I'm out of Redwood after today. This agreement ensures you let me go. Simmons let out a humorless laugh. We'll see if Redwood's board feels the same once the dust settles. Despite that ominous remark, Daniel refused to be baited further. Isabella and Jonathan accompanied him into the hallway where Redwood staff bustled about preparing for the upcoming vote. Jonathan patted Daniel's shoulder. You did well. We have it all on record, witnessed by multiple executives. If Redwood tries anything, they're opening themselves to serious legal ramifications. Isabella exhaled, tension slowly seeping from her limbs. Thank you so much, Mr. Kwan. He smiled gently. I'm just doing what I can. I'll walk you both to the elevator. They traversed the foyer, slipping past the watchful eyes of Redwood's employees. As they entered the elevator, Daniel almost collapsed against the wall, an unsteady breath escaping him. Isabella put a hand on his arm, trying to quell her own trembling. Jonathan quietly pressed the button for the ground floor. That was... Isabella began, voice still shaky. So intense. Daniel nodded. But it's done. They can't force me to do anything else. And you have legal protection. She squeezed his hand, tears of relief pricking her eyes. For the first time in days, she felt something akin to genuine hope. Even if Redwood's individuals bore grudges, the official stance was now recorded. Perhaps now she and Daniel could live without constantly looking over their shoulders. The elevator chimed at the lobby. They stepped into the open air of Redwood's imposing entrance hall, parted ways with Jonathan amid grateful thanks, and at last walked outside. Sunlight bathed them. The city soared around them, indifferent yet welcoming in its everyday bustle. Isabella inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. Daniel gazed at her, eyes soft. "I thank you for staying by my side." She shook her head. "I'd do it all again." He gave a small, hopeful laugh. "Let's get out of here. Maybe we can celebrate or just go home and rest. Your choice." A swirl of emotions, mostly relief, coursed through her. "Home," she decided. "I want to go back to the bakery tomorrow and see what normal life feels like, free of Redwood's threats." Even as she said it, her heart fluttered at the word free. Was it truly over? Daniel nodded, an unspoken agreement passing between them that they'd move forward, together. The walk away from Redwood's glass tower felt surreal, as if stepping out of a tense movie scene into the mundane reality of city life. She thought of the day she met him, a stranger in need of a place to stay, and now he had faced down an entire corporation to protect her safety. At last, they boarded a bus, traveling back to their simpler neighborhood. She held the signed contract in her lap as if it were a shield against Redwood's malice. Daniel rested an arm behind her seat, his posture less guarded than before. The bus hummed along, passengers chattering about everyday struggles, rent, groceries, weekend family gatherings. It felt almost alien to realize she and Daniel had just been in a high-stakes corporate boardroom moments ago. Arriving at their stop, they disembarked under a warm, midday sun. As they approached their familiar rundown building, Isabella couldn't help but smile softly. The battered walls and squeaking stairs held a sort of fierce comfort now. This was their place, their sanctuary. They climbed the steps hand in hand. In the apartment, nothing had changed physically. The same flickering bulb, the same old couch, the same battered kitchenette, yet a sense of renewal glowed from within. Daniel set down his messenger bag, exhaling as though shedding the last vestiges of Redwood's gloom. "Hungry?" she asked, forcing a lighter note into her voice. "We could cook something decent for once." He met her eyes, relief and gratitude flooding his expression. "That sounds perfect." A pause. "We really did it, didn't we?" Her lips curved into a genuine smile, tension unwinding from her shoulders. "We did." They stood in the quiet apartment, hearts brimming with cautious optimism. It felt like a new chapter beckoned. Yes, Redwood might still harbor resentment or hidden agendas, but for now they had a contract that bound them. And more than that, Isabella and Daniel had emerged from the crisis closer and stronger, proof that a single compassionate act could evolve into a powerful alliance, one that even a ruthless corporation struggled to break. Tomorrow, as Isabella returned to the bakery, and Daniel figured out his next steps in a life no longer overshadowed by Redwood, they could start rebuilding. A slow but certain path toward something brighter. One shaped not by fear but by loyalty, empathy, and the quiet conviction that standing together could face down even the most imposing of odds. Early the next morning, rays of sunrise stretched through the faded curtains of Isabella's apartment. A hush lingered in the small living room, as though the space itself needed time to absorb the extraordinary events of the past few days. Isabella rose first, her body still heavy with a mix of relief and fatigue. She tiptoed into the kitchen, half expecting to see Daniel up already. But when she glanced at the couch, he was still peacefully asleep, his face calm for the first time in what felt like weeks. She took a moment to watch him, thinking of how this journey had begun. He had been a stranger, tired, dirty, alone on the street. She had only meant to give him a warm place to sleep and a bite to eat. Instead, she'd unwittingly invited a storm of corporate threats, hidden wealth, and moral dilemmas into her life. Yet in the end, that act of kindness had forged a bond stronger than either of them could have imagined. Smiling softly, she set about brewing coffee. The aroma filled the apartment, gentle and reassuring. Soon enough, Daniel stirred, blinking in the morning light. Isabella handed him a steaming cup. "I figured we could both use a comforting start to the day," she said. He took it gratefully, savoring a slow sip. "No redwood threats, no men in suits at the door," he joked weakly. The tension around his eyes hinted at how worn out he truly was, but his small grin said it all. They had weathered the worst of the storm. "Feels strange," she admitted. "Like we're free but still expecting a knock any minute." Daniel considered this, setting the mug on the chipped table. There might be leftover bitterness from Redwood, but that contract is legally binding, and they've got bigger things to deal with now that they can move forward with their acquisition. We should be safe. The word safe held a world of meaning. Isabella inhaled deeply, letting the relief settle in her chest. "So what comes next for you?" He studied her face. "I've been thinking I might stay in town a bit. Maybe find a small job or start a modest consulting gig, see if I can rebuild. I have no desire to jump back into Redwood's world or any large corporate structure, but there are other ways to use my experience." "And what about those shares?" she asked gently. "The ones Redwood needed you to sign off on?" Daniel shrugged. "They'll finalize them soon. I'll probably receive some money from it or stock payouts, but I don't want to live off Redwood's spoils. I'd rather do something meaningful, maybe help small businesses or support a nonprofit. The world doesn't need more corporate greed." She smiled, warmed by his sincerity. "Whatever you decide, I hope you find real peace in it." His gaze flickered to the battered notebook lying on the table, a testament to everything he'd planned or dreamed during his time on the streets. "There's an idea I wrote down months ago, about a community center that could offer job training for people down on their luck. You know, folks like me who lost their footing in life. Maybe that's something I can invest in now." Isabella felt a surge of admiration. "That's wonderful. You'd be giving people the chance no one ever gave you when you needed it most." His eyes shone with gratitude, and he lifted her hand in his. "None of this would have been possible without you, Isabella. You proved that kindness really can change everything." She ducked her head, a wave of emotion tightening her throat. "I just did what felt right." After they tidied up the remnants of breakfast, Isabella prepared for her shift at the bakery. It was the first day in a long while that she didn't dread stepping out the door. The threat of Redwood hovered in the distance, but not as a looming menace, more like a memory of a bad dream they had endured and overcome. "I'll walk you there," Daniel offered. She shook her head. "I'll be fine. But meet me after I'm done? Maybe around noon? We can grab lunch somewhere that isn't pizza or stale bread." His answering smile was pure affection. "It's a date." Stepping into the crisp morning air, Isabella couldn't help but notice how much lighter her footsteps felt. Neighbors bustled about their usual routines, none suspecting the epic corporate battle she and Daniel had just navigated. She waved hello to a friendly face downstairs, an older woman she occasionally chatted with, and realized she no longer had that gnawing fear of who might be watching. Even the familiar cracks in the pavement seemed less threatening. By the time she reached the bakery, the day was fully alive. Sun filtering through the city's haze, vendors opening stalls, schoolchildren rushing off to classes. Mrs. Beatrice greeted Isabella with her customary brusque nod. "Need you in front of house today," she said. "You did good with the wedding order. Let's see how you handle customers directly." Excitement bubbled in Isabella's chest. This was the promotion Beatrice had hinted at, or at least a trial run. She put on a neat apron, checked the cash register, and, for the first time in ages, felt truly hopeful about her future. She served pastries to morning regulars, answered questions about custom cakes, and earned small tips for her cheerful demeanor. All the while, the knowledge that Daniel was safe eased her mind. During a lull, Mr. Green, the older regular, arrived. He eyed her with a pleased twinkle. "Front of house, are we?" he teased, accepting his bag of pastries. "Yep," she said with a grin. I guess I gotta step up. About time, he said, then leaned forward slightly. You look brighter these days. Found yourself some good news, I reckon? She blushed, recalling all the chaos no one in the bakery truly knew about. But maybe Mr. Green, with his intuitive gaze, sensed the shift. Things are getting better, she said softly. I think I found a bit of peace. He nodded, not pressing further. Well, keep shining, child. The world needs it. With that, he shuffled out, leaving Isabella's heart buoyant. The rest of her shift flew by. Customers came and went, pastries sold out, and Isabella barely noticed her fatigue. At noon, she clocked out, slipping off her apron. Her chest fluttered with anticipation as she stepped outside. Sure enough, Daniel stood waiting by the corner, messenger bag slung over his shoulder. She waved, and he waved back. No tinted cars, no suspicious men trailing him. Just an ordinary moment in the neighborhood. They walked down the block, deciding on a small diner for lunch. Over sandwiches, they spoke quietly about plans. Isabella mentioned possibly saving up for a better apartment, one without constant leaks, or a landlord like Mr. Carter. Daniel considered investing in something stable, enough to secure a reliable income, but not so flashy as to tempt Redwood or other vultures. Halfway through the meal, Isabella's phone buzzed. It was a text from Beatrice. You handled the register well today. We'll offer a front-of-house position full-time if you're interested. Pay is slightly better. Isabella gasped in delight, showing Daniel the message. He beamed, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. That's fantastic, he said. You've more than earned it. She nodded, emotions welling. It feels like everything's finally falling into place. Later that afternoon, they strolled back to the apartment, passing the little market where, weeks ago, Isabella had bought groceries while Daniel waited outside, anxious about being recognized. The memory felt distant now. Her heart lifted at the thought of returning to normal routines, only this time the threat that once pressed in on them was lifted. Redwood might never be a shining example of ethics, but the contract's protective clause gave them breathing room. At the apartment, Daniel disappeared into the bedroom for a moment, rummaging through his battered duffel bag. He emerged with a small item in hand, a leather-bound notepad reminiscent of his usual one, but smaller and newer. It's for you, he said, a shy tilt to his grin. Me? She accepted the notepad curiously. The leather smelled fresh, and inside, the first page was blank except for a short inscription in Daniel's neat handwriting. Never stop believing that kindness can change lives. Her eyes stung with emotion. Oh, Daniel, thank you. He shrugged, trying to mask his own feeling. I know you like to jot recipes, or maybe your future goals. Now that you don't have to worry about Redwood, you can dream big. She recalled how he'd scribbled in his old notebook all through their ordeal. Plans, phone numbers, deals. In a strange way, that habit had guided them through crisis. The gift felt symbolic, like a fresh start for both. Overwhelmed, she impulsively hugged him. He returned the embrace gently, the tension in his posture melting into a warm closeness. Let's fill these pages, she murmured, with things we want to do next. Adventures, improvements for the bakery, that community center you talked about, whatever we want to build. He smiled into her hair. I'd like that. It's time to shape our own future. They spent the remainder of the afternoon in quiet contentment, drafting ideas for that very future. Isabella jotted a few lines about a small pastry business she might one day open, her own brand, focusing on affordable treats for the neighborhood. Daniel wrote notes about contacting potential donors for a community initiative. It felt surreal, mapping out hopeful dreams rather than dodging corporate threats. Yet it also felt right, like the path they were meant to walk. Evening settled over the city, the sky turning soft purple outside the window. Over a simple dinner, This time featuring fresh vegetables and a small roast chicken Daniel had splurged on, they shared a sense of home. Isabella noticed that every worried glance at the hallway door was absent. Daniel no longer jumped at every outside noise. The stress that had once darkened their eyes was gradually fading. After the plates were cleared, they curled up on the couch. The flickering bulb overhead cast mellow shadows across the walls. Daniel flipped on the tiny TV, another humble item rescued from a pawn shop, and they found an old comedy to watch, letting the silly laughter fill the apartment. Isabella leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, savoring the mundane sweetness of it all. "You know," she murmured when a commercial break interrupted, "I used to think surviving was all there was, working enough to keep a roof overhead, paying off the landlord, never hoping for more. But now, I see there's so much possibility." Daniel pressed a soft kiss to her hair. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. Food, shelter, and trust. That changed me. I never want to forget it." Her heart brimmed with warmth. "Me neither." They watched the rest of the show in companionable silence, letting the weight of the last few weeks slip further away. Finally, as the hour grew late, Isabella clicked off the TV. A hush settled, and she and Daniel traded sleepy smiles. The day had been long but mercifully free of drama. It felt right to end it in calm reflection. Before turning in, Isabella lingered near the small window that overlooked the street. Nightlights glowed in distant apartments, people going about their peaceful routines. She thought of Redwood's towering headquarters, the suits who'd be analyzing the newly signed contract. They might remain adversaries in some sense, but for now, the two worlds had parted ways, and in her little corner of the city, all was quiet. Daniel joined her by the window, slipping an arm around her waist. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we keep moving forward. You, me, and a future we choose." She turned into him, letting that promise soothe every scar left by the conflict. "Yes," she whispered, "I can't wait." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen